Zoe Hart didn't do many interviews. She avoided the press the same way she avoided parties, sponsorship events, or anywhere someone might want something from her without saying it out loud. But in July of 2022, she made an exception. A small YouTube podcast, Late Night Confessions, had messaged her with a request that stood out, an unedited one-on-one sit-down about boundaries, burnout, and what it really meant to perform intimacy for strangers online. The host, Liam Drew, had just over 12,000 subscribers and a reputation for oddly vulnerable interviews. His guests weren't always famous, but the comments were always filled with people saying the same thing. This felt real. Zoe replied with a short yes. No publicist, no delay, just a single condition, no live streaming, only pre-recorded footage. She wanted to review the edit before it went up. That agreement would never be fulfilled. Zoe arrived at the studio just before 4 p.m. A small room above a coffee shop in Pasadena. She wore a plain white tank, jeans, and light makeup. Her long brunette hair was tied back in a simple braid, and she brought with her a green smoothie and a canvas tote bag. Liam described her as polite, a little reserved, but warm. The two spent about 10 minutes chatting off camera before the recording began. She seemed comfortable. According to the digital timestamp, the footage began rolling at 4:17 p.m. What remains of that day, the only clip the public ever saw, runs for precisely 14 minutes and 12 seconds. It starts with laughter. Liam asks how she handles online fame. Zoe jokes that she doesn't. She says, "There's this weird thing where you become this idea. People think they know you. They don't." The first 6 minutes are smooth, casual, and almost forgettable. They talk about her online routines, her shift from Twitch to OnlyFans, and how creating content in private spaces still feels invasive in ways she can't fully explain. Then, something shifts. At around minute 8, Zoe begins to fidget. She adjusts her position in the chair. Her hands move off-screen more frequently, as if reaching for something that isn't there. Her eyes dart, not toward Liam, but beyond him. Her answers get shorter. One-word replies where there used to be stories. She says she's fine when Liam pauses to ask if everything's okay. Then comes the silence. It's the kind of silence you don't notice until it's been going on too long. Liam tries to redirect the conversation, asking about what's next for her career. Zoe doesn't answer immediately. She tilts her head slightly, looking past the camera, and her expression changes. Not confusion, not distraction, something quieter, almost like dread. And then, nothing. The footage ends abruptly. No outro, no transition, no "we'll be right back." Just a hard cut to black. That moment, Zoe glancing off screen, became the centerpiece of every theory, every Reddit thread, and every fan's breakdown. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't theatrical. But it was sudden. And it was the last time anyone saw her. Liam's version of events surfaced quickly. He told Pasadena police that the interview ran for just under 30 minutes, but that around the halfway point, Zoe asked for a break to use the restroom. She took her phone and stepped out. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Liam claimed he checked the hallway, knocked on the bathroom door, and even went outside briefly to look for her. She was gone. Her tote bag and smoothie were missing, but she hadn't said goodbye. No message, no indication of discomfort. He assumed she'd had a personal emergency and left without wanting to explain. When he tried to contact her later that evening to confirm when she'd like the episode posted, her number went straight to voicemail. That voicemail never changed. Police opened a missing persons file the next morning. By then, Zoe's family hadn't heard from her in over 24 hours. Her phone had gone inactive. Her apartment in Los Feliz was untouched, the bed made, dishes clean, and no signs of struggle or packing. She'd left her laptop on, and unread emails had piled up, some of them urgent. Fans noticed her absence quickly. On a platform like OnlyFans, where creators often posted daily, even if only a photo, silence became deafening within hours. By day 3, her subreddit had exploded with speculation. Many pointed fingers at Liam, whose own social media went dark after police involvement was made public. Others suggested she had staged the disappearance, burnt out by the public eye. A handful insisted she'd been planning something dramatic. But the people who knew her best, her cousin Rachel, who handled her business inbox, and her two closest friends from Twitch, said no. She would never ghost like this, not without saying goodbye. When Pasadena PD released the 14-minute clip to the public a week later, the goal was to generate leads. Instead, it became a viral phenomenon. Frame-by-frame analyses flooded YouTube and TikTok. Lip readers tried to interpret her final whispered words. Audio engineers amplified background sounds, hoping to catch a door creak, a footstep, or a breath. Most focused on her eyes, the direction they moved, the way they widened just slightly in the last second before the cut. What was she seeing? What no one could answer, and what haunted investigators most, was why the footage ended mid-conversation. Liam swore he didn't stop recording. His camera's internal memory backed him up. It hadn't been stopped manually. It had been cut. The data log marked the end as corrupted. No footage beyond 1412 was ever recovered. And the building's hallway camera? It had gone offline between 4:32 and 4:36 p.m., a window that coincided perfectly with Zoe's disappearance. Maintenance claimed it was a coincidence. The studio's Wi-Fi router had temporarily rebooted. Coincidence or not, the timing was precise. For weeks, no one could prove if she left that building alive. And yet, in that last moment, frozen in digital grain, Zoe doesn't look surprised. She looks like she recognizes who just walked in. The longer Zoe Hart stayed missing, the louder one question grew among investigators, journalists, and strangers obsessed with the case. Who was she before she became Zoe? On paper, she had almost no history before age 18. No old social media, no childhood photos, no high school yearbook entries under her current name. Her digital footprint started abruptly in 2014. First, with a short-lived fashion blog, then a Tumblr under the username Zart Visual, where she posted low-lit selfies and cryptic captions about reinvention. Her legal name change was confirmed through court documents sealed in Idaho, done through standard emancipation procedures with no public contest. At the time, it looked like a teenager wanting distance from a small-town life, but it didn't explain the intensity of the break. She hadn't just stepped away from her past. She'd buried it. What eventually cracked the surface wasn't a search warrant or forensic lead. It was a teacher. After a local Idaho news outlet aired a segment on the Zoe Hart disappearance, a retired history teacher from Twin Falls contacted the Pasadena police with a quiet but direct claim. That's Anna Caldwell. He remembered her vividly, he said. Her eyes hadn't changed. In the photo used on television, Zoe's expression was distant and subdued, but familiar to him in a way he couldn't shake. Her face was thinner, her style different, but the teacher insisted she was a former student who had dropped out midway through her junior year and never came back. When the department cross-referenced school records from Twin Falls High, one name stood out: Anna Michelle Caldwell, born May 22, 1996. The physical description matched. So did the date of birth, fingerprint confirmation, pulled from a modeling release form Zoe had signed in 2021. Sealed it. Zoe Hart had been Anna Caldwell. In 2012, Anna was a quiet, slightly withdrawn 16-year-old. Her grades were average, she played flute in the school band, and she worked weekends at a local diner. She lived with her mother and older half-brother in a faded one-story rental on the outskirts of town. There were no arrest records, no documented abuse. But something had happened, something no one in Twin Falls had talked about in a decade. Classmates interviewed later described a sudden shift during her junior year. She'd returned from winter break more distant than before, rarely speaking in class, often covering her arms with long sleeves, even in warm weather. A few students remembered seeing her cry in the bathroom between periods. She stopped showing up to band practice. Then, one day in April, she didn't come to school at all. Her teachers received an email from her mother, explaining that Anna would be finishing the year through an online curriculum. She never returned for senior year. Her transcripts ended with a GED from a charter school 3 towns away. And just like that, Anna Caldwell disappeared from public records. When reporters tried to reach her mother for comment, they found a disconnected landline and an abandoned mailbox. The last address listed under her name was a trailer park outside Pocatello, but neighbors claimed she had moved out over 5 years ago. No forwarding information. The woman simply didn't want to be found. What little information trickled in came from people who had known Anna distantly, co-workers from the diner, old classmates, and a former guidance counselor. One described Anna as sweet, but always walking on eggshells. Another remembered how she avoided group projects and flinched when people spoke loudly. A boy she had dated briefly mentioned that she had once told him, "There are things I'll never tell anyone. I'm already working on leaving all this behind." When asked what she meant, he said she didn't explain, just stared at the wall like she wasn't really there. One girl, now a nurse in Boise, offered something more concrete. She claimed that during the spring of their junior year, Anna had confided in her about being followed, not by strangers, by someone she knew, a family friend or relative. She wasn't clear. Anna had mentioned waking up to find someone had gone through her notebooks. She began carrying pepper spray. The girl told her to report it. Anna just shook her head and said, "It wouldn't matter." That was the last real conversation they had. 2 weeks later, she was gone. When asked why she never came forward sooner, the woman said, "Because I thought she made it out, and I didn't want to pull her back." The more people looked into Anna Caldwell, the more it became clear that Zoe Hart wasn't an alias. She was a survival mechanism. Every step of her adult life had been engineered to create distance. Her social accounts were stripped of geotags. She rotated devices every few months, used different usernames for different platforms, and paid in cash whenever possible. She once told a podcast host that she'd never sign a lease under her real name again. "People underestimate how easy it is to find you," she'd said, "even if you don't want to be found." That line, in hindsight, took on a much heavier weight. At the time of her disappearance, Zoe had over 120,000 OnlyFans subscribers, a 6-figure income, and an apartment lease in Los Angeles signed under a shell company. She donated to women's shelters under anonymous aliases and refused to post photos that included street signs, vehicles, or windows. But the question investigators couldn't answer was this: if she had built an entire life to disappear from someone, had that someone finally caught up to her? Theories multiplied. Some thought she was fleeing again, that the 14-minute interview cut short was her sending a signal. Others believed she'd been found, not by fans or stalkers, by someone from the original life, the life she'd paid to erase. The more they searched, the less they found. Her entire existence, past and present, had been carved like a tunnel with no lights, just fragments of names and events that no one would confirm. And yet, in the final seconds of that podcast recording, when she turned her head and her face changed, what if she didn't look scared because of something new? What if it was someone she had already run from once before? 7 days after Zoe Hart vanished, a housekeeper at the Sunrise Motor Inn, a 2-star motel just off Interstate 15 outside Barstow, California, opened the door to room 109, expecting to find another checkout mess. What she found instead was a bed that had clearly been slept in but not remade, a black hoodie tossed across a cracked armchair, a half-eaten granola bar on the desk, and a phone charger still plugged into the wall. The guest had never officially checked out. The front desk manager remembered a young woman signing in just after 1 a.m., paying in cash and declining housekeeping. She'd stayed for 2 nights under the name Emily Ray. There was no ID. It wasn't required. That wasn't unusual for that motel, but this time it triggered an alert. By then, images of Zoe had already circulated through missing persons networks. The manager called local authorities. When police arrived and opened the room's small safe, they found a backpack containing Zoe's wallet, empty of cards, and her personal phone, wiped clean. No contacts, no browser history, no photos, just the operating system and a locked SIM. But that wasn't all. In the side pocket of the backpack, investigators found a second phone, an older model, prepaid, no case, low battery. It was powered off but intact. When forensics extracted its data, they found almost nothing. No apps, no texts, one call log, one contact, saved under a single initial, E. The burner phone had dialed E 5 times between July 9th and July 13th. 4 outgoing, 1 answered. The final call lasted 42 seconds and was made at 12:32 a.m. on the 14th, just 35 minutes before Zoe checked into the motel. After that, there was nothing. Security footage confirmed it was her. She arrived at 1:07 a.m., hood up, shoulders tense, no car. She came on foot from the direction of the truck stop down the road. She had no suitcase, just a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. The grainy footage showed her signing the guest book, glancing over her shoulder twice, then following the manager to room 109. There's no sign of anyone else. The motel had 2 exits and 4 security cameras, none of which recorded her leaving. There was no Uber ordered, no vehicle registered to the room, and no footage of Zoe stepping out. It was like she walked in and never came back. Out. The room itself offered more questions than answers. The bed was half stripped, like someone had started to make it and then stopped. A pile of folded clothes sat on the bathroom counter, beside a small toiletry bag with travel-sized shampoo and makeup wipes. In the trash was an empty bottle of sleeping pills. Not a suicide attempt, just a few over-the-counter capsules. A receipt dated 2 days earlier showed a purchase from a 24-hour convenience store 3 blocks away. Investigators visited the store and pulled surveillance footage. It showed Zoe, hair tied up, no makeup, face down, buying a Gatorade, crackers, and the sleeping pills. She said nothing to the clerk except debit, paid, left. That was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. The motel room door had no signs of forced entry. The window latch was still intact. But 2 things stood out. First, a torn envelope was found in the motel desk drawer. It had no letter inside, but the back had a partial fingerprint smudge, later confirmed to match Zoe's right index. Second, the television remote was missing from the room. It wasn't a detail anyone would have thought mattered until the motel cleaning staff said it was standard practice to log any stolen items. That remote was unaccounted for and never found. No fingerprints on the TV either. For a woman who had spent nearly 2 days in a cramped space, Zoe had left barely a trace. By now, the E on the burner phone had become central to the investigation. Detectives attempted to triangulate the call data, but the number had since been deactivated. It was a pay-as-you-go line, purchased with cash at a Walmart outside of San Bernardino. The ID used to activate it was fake. Whoever E was, they hadn't wanted to be found. But the call logs didn't lie. Someone had picked up that final call. 42 seconds. That was enough for someone to say, "I'm here," or "Meet me," or "This is it." But no voice recordings remained. The motel's Wi-Fi login showed Zoe connected her main phone to the network on the evening of July 14th at 8:14 p.m. and disconnected at 10:02 p.m. What she did during those 2 hours remains unknown. There were no logins to social media, no emails sent, and no texts recorded. Investigators believe she may have been waiting for someone or something. And by dawn, she was gone. When news of the motel discovery broke, speculation flooded online communities. Some believed Zoe was preparing to flee again, that the burner phone and cash payments meant she knew someone was close. Others latched onto the idea of a secret meeting. Theories ranged from a former partner to an ex-manager to a fan-turned-stalker known only through old Discord screenshots. But all of it circled back to one letter. E. Reddit sleuths pulled old chat logs and podcast transcripts trying to find anyone Zoe had mentioned with that initial. They came up with 3 names. None of them matched the area code on the burner contact. What haunted investigators most was the absence of struggle. No broken glass, no blood, no DNA. Just signs of someone preparing to leave in a hurry and vanishing instead. As if she was waiting for a ride that came, quietly, through a door that was never forced open. And if someone did pick her up that night, it meant one thing above all else. She had trusted them enough to open that door. The burner phone's last contact, listed under a single letter, led investigators through weeks of dead ends. The number had been deactivated just hours after Zoe was last seen, and the prepaid SIM offered no subscriber information. But a forensic specialist working with the digital unit noticed a pattern in the metadata. The number had once been linked briefly to a Wi-Fi network in Las Vegas, registered to a commercial photography studio called Kessler Image Group. It wasn't much, but it was something. A lead. The business was owned by Ethan Kessler, a 34-year-old freelance photographer who had worked with adult content creators, including several former OnlyFans models, before shuttering the business quietly in 2021. The connection to Zoe wasn't obvious until they looked into his client history. Kessler denied knowing Zoe Hart. In his initial interview, he claimed the name didn't ring a bell. When investigators showed him a photo, he shrugged. "Looks familiar," he said. "Might have followed me once." He insisted he hadn't shot content in nearly a year. No current clients, no involvement in her business, just a guy who used to take pictures and had moved on. But something about his answers didn't sit right with detectives. He offered too much detail in some places, none in others. His timeline was vague. His address history was recent, but thin. When asked for his current devices, he claimed his phone had been stolen. No police report, no backup, just gone. It took a subpoena to dig deeper. Kessler's name had been linked to over a dozen OnlyFans accounts between 2019 and 2021, mostly under aliases. He didn't operate as a visible manager. He handled content schedules, analytics, and personal branding for creators trying to break through saturated algorithms. He built paywall structures. He also held passwords. Former clients described him as helpful at first, then controlling. One woman told detectives she had to change her bank accounts after he began withdrawing management fees without approval. Another filed a restraining order after he showed up at her apartment uninvited, months after she'd fired him. But what really caught investigators' attention wasn't what he'd done recently. It was what they found buried in his social messages from 2016. Back then, Zoe had still been Anna Caldwell. At the time, Anna had been 19 and living in a shared apartment in Boise. She was active on modeling forums, occasionally posting under the username AMC, a recovered message thread. From an archived email showed Ethan, then 26, reaching out to her under the name Eli Marcus. He claimed to be a photographer based in Seattle, offering travel-paid shoots and private referrals. The tone was casual, almost friendly, but the language escalated fast. Within 2 weeks, he was asking for personal photos, discussing pay rates, and pressuring her to sign a contract. Anna never responded after the 5th message, but a file recovered from her old hard drive, years later, would show she'd saved screenshots of every word. Detectives began building a profile. A pattern emerged, targeting younger women early in their content careers, offering opportunity in exchange for trust, and then gradually asserting control. Not outright threats, just manipulation. One creator said she felt like she owed him. Another described how he'd guilt her into sharing location data, just for safety. None of it had crossed a legal threshold. Until now. When questioned a second time, Ethan maintained his distance. He called the investigation a witch hunt and told the detective that he had nothing to do with Zoe Hart. But by the next morning, his Instagram was gone. His business website, deactivated. His Venmo, Cash App, and Patreon accounts were wiped. Then came the Reddit profile, deleted entirely. Within 48 hours of his second interview, Ethan Kessler had scrubbed himself from nearly every platform. He stopped answering phone calls. When investigators returned to his Las Vegas address with a search warrant, they found the apartment half-packed. Closet open, drawers emptied. The front door was locked, but the back window had been left slightly ajar. Neighbors described him as quiet, polite, and always paying rent on time. A few recalled seeing him load up his car late at night 2 days earlier. One neighbor remembered a woman visiting often the month before. Young, long hair, usually wearing a hoodie. She matched Zoe's general description, but the building had no cameras, and no one had a license plate. For investigators, the shift in Kessler's behavior was telling. People who are truly uninvolved don't usually delete their entire online identity after speaking with police. His attempts to disappear suggested fear or guilt. Still, without direct evidence linking him to Zoe's disappearance, there was no arrest. Not yet. The burner phone data only proved a connection, not intent, not presence, not harm. But it gave the case new urgency. The man who claimed not to know her had at some point contacted her under an alias, had sent her contracts, had built a digital business around creators like her. And now, he was running. The public caught on quickly. Online communities labeled him E. They flooded his old pages with questions and reposted screenshots from former collaborators who now wanted nothing to do with him. Reddit sleuths mapped his travel history based on tagged posts, hotel check-ins, and digital breadcrumbs. One photo from early July, just 10 days before Zoe vanished, showed him passing through Barstow, California. He had captioned it, "Desert Stop. No service, no stress." It was posted just 3 miles from the Sunrise Motor Inn. As investigators dug deeper into his history, they discovered one more link. In 2015, Ethan had visited Twin Falls, Idaho, for a freelance shoot. That year, Anna Caldwell had filed a sealed police report claiming she was being followed. And suddenly, the name Zoe Hart wasn't just about reinvention, it was about escape, from someone who had found her once, and maybe had found her again. As the weeks passed and Ethan Kessler disappeared from every corner of the internet, investigators turned their attention back to where it all started. The podcast. Late Night Confessions had once been a footnote, a small niche channel barely scraping a few thousand views per episode. But now, its most infamous guest was missing, and its host, Liam Drew, found himself under a magnifying glass. Initially, Liam had been cooperative. He gave police access to his equipment, let them search the studio, and handed over the raw footage. But as the investigation deepened, cracks began to appear in his story. And once you looked closely, nothing about that night lined up the way it should have. Liam's original statement was short and confident. He claimed the interview lasted about 25 minutes before Zoe asked for a quick break to use the restroom. She walked out of the room, phone in hand, and never came back. After waiting 30 minutes, he checked the hallway, couldn't find her, and assumed she had left. He figured she'd had second thoughts about airing the episode and didn't want to explain. It was strange, he admitted, but not impossible. People ghosted all the time. That version of events might have held up, except the raw footage told a different story. The video didn't last 25 minutes, it lasted 14. 14 minutes and 12 seconds, to be exact, and ended mid-sentence, with no indication of a pause, break, or transition. No camera angle shift, no audio fade. The screen just went black. Digital forensics confirmed it wasn't manually stopped. The recording software had not been shut down. Instead, it had been interrupted, either by an abrupt system shutdown or a sudden disconnection. That's not something you expect during a casual water break. And it directly contradicted Liam's claim that Zoe had left during a pause in filming. When detectives brought this up, Liam became defensive. He said he must have remembered the timeline wrong. Maybe the footage auto-saved mid-break. Maybe Zoe asked to stop filming, and he hit the wrong button. His explanations changed each time. First, he said she got a text that upset her. Then, he said she got a call. Then, he claimed she'd looked visibly shaken before walking out. But investigators had watched the clip over and over. There was no text alert, no incoming call, no verbal cue about stepping away, just a glance. Then, silence. Then black. A deeper analysis of the footage revealed something else. Near the 11-minute mark, as Zoe begins to fidget and glance off camera, a faint knocking sound can be heard. It's soft, barely audible beneath Liam's voice, but present. 3 distinct taps, then a pause, then 2 more. Zoe hears it. Her head turns slightly toward the source, but Liam doesn't react. He keeps talking. Either he didn't hear it, or he pretended not to. That sound would become the subject of intense speculation. Some said it was just ambient noise, plumbing, pipes, wind. But acoustic analysts from the lab disagreed. The rhythm of the knocks suggested intention, not random noise. Someone was signaling from behind the door. And Zoe noticed. When pressed again, Liam claimed he had no idea what knocking sound they were referring to. He stopped responding to calls after that. His lawyer contacted the department 2 days later, requesting all further communication go through legal channels. The message was clear. Liam was done cooperating. No more interviews, no more studio access, no more statements. He locked down his YouTube channel, set all his social media accounts to private, and quietly moved out of his rental space above the coffee shop where the studio had been. By the time a follow-up search warrant was approved, the studio was empty, stripped of gear, furniture gone, walls wiped down, even the floor rug was missing. There were still no signs of a struggle, no blood, no fingerprints out of place. But the absence of evidence had become a pattern. Clean exits, sudden disappearances, digital footprints were erased just as quickly as they were made. When detectives requested Liam's security footage from the hallway outside the studio, the building manager informed them the system had glitched. Again. The hard drive had overwritten itself. The crucial 4:30 to 5 p.m. window from the day of the interview was gone. Corrupted. The second coincidental error on the day Zoe vanished. Rumors spread quickly. Online forums began to question whether the entire podcast had been a setup, a way to lure Zoe somewhere isolated, somewhere controlled. People dug through old late-night confessions episodes, looking for patterns, other guests who had seemed nervous, conversations that turned abruptly dark, moments where Liam appeared too invested. They found little. Most guests had only good things to say about him, but then one old clip resurfaced from 2021. A now-deleted episode featuring a model who, near the end of her segment, suddenly goes quiet and says, "I didn't think he'd come here." Liam laughs it off. The moment passes, but in hindsight, it felt like a warning. Investigators tried to subpoena Liam's personal devices, but by then it was too late. His phone had been factory reset. His laptop was missing. No backups, no cloud syncs. The man who had once uploaded weekly behind-the-scenes footage had scrubbed every trace of his digital identity clean. He wasn't charged with anything. Not yet. There was no evidence proving he'd done harm. Just a growing list of inconsistencies and a timeline full of holes. And for the first time, detectives considered something they hadn't before. What if Zoe hadn't been alone in that studio? What if someone else had come in through the side stairwell? Someone not visible on any camera? Someone Liam recognized but couldn't or wouldn't talk about? Because if Zoe had recognized who knocked, and if Liam knew exactly who had come to that door, then the story he told wasn't just wrong. It was protecting someone. The email came from an encrypted address with no name, no signature, and no traceable origin. Just a subject line that read, "Twin Falls. Look deeper." The body contained one sentence. It wasn't the first time he found her. Attached was a grainy JPEG. At first glance, the image looked unremarkable. Just two people in a car, windows rolled down, parked near what looked like a field. But when detectives enlarged it, the recognition was instant. The girl in the passenger seat was unmistakably Anna Caldwell, young, maybe 19, wearing a zip-up hoodie and looking directly at the camera with an expression that sat somewhere between blank and tense. The man in the driver's seat was partially turned, eyes mid-blink, but his profile was clear enough. It was Ethan Kessler. The photo was dated August 18, 2016. That date mattered. Up until this point, there had been no verified contact between Anna Caldwell and Ethan Kessler. The messages he sent her, under the name Eli Marcus, had gone unanswered. Or so they thought. But now, that timeline cracked. That photo proved not just a digital connection, but a physical one. It meant she had been in a car with him, alone, somewhere rural, somewhere far from witnesses. Investigators began digging through archived police records from Twin Falls. Most juvenile cases were sealed, but with a formal request, they were granted partial access to one file, an incident report from late 2016. The name Anna Caldwell was redacted, but context made it clear. The complaint had been filed by a teenage girl claiming she was being followed, photographed, and harassed by a man 10 years older who had originally contacted her through an online modeling board. The accused, Ethan Kessler. At the time, the case had gone nowhere. There was no hard proof beyond text messages and the girl's testimony. She had refused a medical exam. No physical harm had occurred. Her mother, listed in the report as the primary contact, had intervened. According to the case notes, she requested the investigation be dropped, stating that her daughter was confused, dramatic, and possibly seeking attention. The officer noted that the girl cried throughout the interview and seemed afraid to speak in front of her parent. One line stood out. She asked if we could keep this sealed. Said she was planning to leave. Within 2 months, Anna Caldwell had transferred schools. By early 2017, she was living under a new legal name. The timing was no longer coincidence. It was a reaction. And whatever happened between her and Ethan in 2016, it had scared her enough to change everything. Detectives re-reviewed the image. Zoe, then still Anna, looked worn down, tired, not injured but emotionally dulled. Her hands were folded in her lap. Ethan's hand rested casually on the steering wheel. The background was a grassy lot near a county park, a known meetup point for Craigslist exchanges. No witnesses had ever come forward. The photo had likely been taken from a distance, maybe by a bystander, maybe by someone who had been watching, someone who hadn't spoken until now. The email sender never followed up, but that single image filled in a blank. Investigators hadn't realized existed. It reframed everything. Zoe hadn't simply feared being found. She had already been found once before. The public image of Zoe Hart, confident and in control, was built on the ashes of something buried years earlier, something never acknowledged, never processed publicly, and almost successfully erased. Detectives tried to track down her mother, but every effort stalled. She had moved several times, lived under a married name, and had no current social media presence. One old neighbor remembered her as tight-lipped and not the nurturing type. When questioned back in 2016, she had insisted her daughter was making things up. She refused to hand over her own phone for inspection. She denied any knowledge of Ethan, despite logs that later revealed 2 calls placed between her number and his within a 3-week window. Whether she was protecting herself or someone else remained unclear. But one thing stood out in the case file, a quote from Anna buried halfway through the report. She had said, "He told me he could ruin me, that no one would believe a kid with no father and a broken home." The officer had scribbled next to it, "Sounds rehearsed?" It wasn't. It was remembered. When the image leaked onto Reddit months later, internet sleuths exploded with speculation. Threads ran for days trying to determine who took the picture, why Zoe had gotten into that car, and what had really happened that day. But the most haunting question was also the simplest. Why hadn't she told anyone? The answer, investigators realized, was threaded through every choice Zoe had made since she turned 18. The name change, the new city, the isolation, the refusal to work with traditional modeling agencies. She hadn't just changed her identity, she had built a life where she controlled every access point to herself, because she knew what it felt like to have someone break through those boundaries. And now, in light of everything, the burner phone in the motel made more sense. The name listed as E wasn't cryptic. It was personal. She had saved his number under the initial of the one man who had once made her run from her own name, the same man who had waited 7 years to reappear. And when he finally did, she still thought she could outrun him. It didn't come from law enforcement, not from Zoe's family, not from the journalists or private investigators who had spent over a year trying to piece her life together. It came from a Reddit thread titled simply OF Creator Archive Project. The user behind it, an anonymous account with no profile picture and no public karma, claimed they were cataloging lost and deactivated OnlyFans content to preserve creator work before it disappeared forever. It was niche, obsessive, and largely unnoticed, until one night in October 2023, When that user posted a screenshot from an encrypted zip folder they said had come from a scraped backup of Zoe Hart's content library. The image wasn't published publicly, just the metadata, a file name, a timestamp, and a few redacted notes. But the date, July 13th, 2022, was what stopped everyone cold. It was the night Zoe vanished, and the timestamp was 11:42 p.m., less than 2 hours after she had last been seen at the Sunrise Motor Inn. The user posted an update the next day. They'd decrypted the image. It was a selfie, front-facing, unedited, taken in a dimly lit motel bathroom. Zoe's eyes were red. Her cheeks were blotchy. She wasn't posing. She wasn't wearing makeup. She looked drained and visibly shaken, but calm enough to hold the phone and press the shutter. At first glance, it seemed like just another mirror shot, but something about the composition felt wrong. The angle was too low. The phone wasn't centered. And then someone noticed the reflection behind her, half obscured by the edge of the frame. In the mirror, behind Zoe, barely visible in the right corner of the bathroom doorway, stood a man. Not Ethan. Not Liam. Someone else. The figure wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the phone. His face was partially turned, but the structure, jawline, build, and posture was enough to rule out the two men previously tied to her case. He wore a dark hoodie, the hood pulled up, shadowing most of his features. The lighting caught only part of his profile, just enough to show that he wasn't surprised. He was watching her take the photo, and Zoe, from her expression, seemed to know he was there. She wasn't sneaking the image. She wasn't hiding him. She included him. The internet reaction was immediate. Threads spun out across multiple subreddits, each zooming into different corners of the frame. Facial recognition software was thrown at the blurred outline. Amateur sleuths tried to match the shape of his nose and the slope of his brow to any known figure in the case. But the more people looked, the more questions emerged. Why take the photo at all? Why save it, even briefly? And who was he? Metadata confirmed it had been taken with Zoe's main phone. The same one was found wiped clean inside her backpack at the Barstow Motel. The image had been automatically uploaded to her encrypted cloud storage, likely without her realizing it, thanks to a background sync setting she'd never disabled. It was stored in a subfolder used for content drafts. Investigators confirmed that the original image, full resolution and untouched, had indeed come from her device. It hadn't been fabricated. It hadn't been planted. It was real. And it hadn't been meant for public release. Detectives requested full access to the ZIP archive, which included other undated photos, mostly studio test shots, and unused selfies. But nothing else in the batch matched the emotional tone of that one file. It stood out, not just because of the content, but because of the decision to capture it at all. What did Zoe mean by it? Was she documenting her fear, trying to leave behind a breadcrumb, or was she doing what she'd done for years, controlling her own narrative, even when the outcome was slipping out of her hands? Behind closed doors, law enforcement began cross-referencing the image with known associates. A face-matching algorithm generated several possibilities, but none with high enough confidence to act on. They began revisiting names buried deep in Zoe's original life, people from Twin Falls, ex-boyfriends, and family members estranged and long gone. One name rose to the surface, not from court records, from the 2016 police report. Listed briefly under household occupants, Jason Caldwell, older half-brother, no birth date provided, no statements collected. He hadn't been interviewed during the original complaint, just mentioned, then ignored. At the time, he had been 22. No job listed, no school enrollment, just a name on paper, and then nothing. Now, suddenly, that name mattered. Investigators began digging through DMV databases, property records, and employment files. Jason Caldwell had no criminal record, but he also had no digital footprint after 2018, no bank activity, no medical insurance, no listed address. His last known location? A trailer registered under a friend's name just outside Los Angeles, 4 years earlier. When the lead detective showed the blurry mirror image to Zoe's former friend from Idaho, the one who had helped identify her as Anna Caldwell, the reaction was immediate. "That's him," she said. "That's her brother." It changed the trajectory of the case. For over a year, the focus had been on men who had wanted access to Zoe, businessmen, manipulators, predators she had encountered online. But what if the real danger had always come from someone who already had access, not through charm, not through power, through family? And if that man had stood in the doorway that night, calmly watching her take a final photo? Then, Zoe Hart's last message hadn't been to the public. It had been to herself. Proof, just in case no one believed her again. The blurry face in the mirror, once dismissed as too vague to mean anything, was suddenly the focal point of everything. When facial enhancement software sharpened the contours, bone structure, chin length, hairline, it yielded a partial match that wasn't tied to any of Zoe's online associates, past collaborators, or the known suspects. But buried in an older internal DMV archive, one match stood out: Jason Caldwell, born March 11, 1993. Half-brother to Anna Caldwell, same mother, different fathers, no longer a ghost in a file, now the most dangerous person in this investigation. It wasn't the name that shocked investigators, it was how close they'd been to it the entire time. Jason had been mentioned once, in a forgotten 2016 police report, noted only as a household member, no interview, no follow-up. At the time, he was 23 and living on and off at home in Twin Falls. When Anna, still a minor, filed a harassment complaint later that year, Jason's name never appeared again. Not in court filings, not in statements. But when detectives pulled sealed juvenile court documents from 2015, another detail emerged: a restraining order. Anna had filed one a year earlier. The request was specific. She stated she didn't feel safe around him, that she often locked her bedroom door at night, that she had caught him reading her private messages. No charges were filed, but the restraining order was granted for 6 months. Her mother, once again, intervened. 3 weeks later, the order was voluntarily dropped. No one outside the family ever knew why. By the time Anna turned 18, she had cut all contact with Jason. Her name change came swiftly after. Investigators now saw the timeline with new clarity. She wasn't reinventing herself just to escape a reputation. She had been running from a relative with a documented history of boundary violations, one who until recently had remained completely under the radar. But Jason hadn't disappeared. Records showed he had spent time in Idaho's correctional system for an aggravated assault in 2017. The case had nothing to do with Zoe. He had been arrested after attacking a man during a drug-related dispute outside a bar. He served 4 years. No visitors listed, no incoming calls recorded under Zoe's name. But just 6 months after his release in early 2021, Jason officially vanished from legal databases. His driver's license expired. No credit activity, no tax records. But a deeper search through identity fraud alerts revealed something else. A DMV clerk had flagged a man attempting to renew a license under the name Jeremy Callan in Riverside County. The address used was a mailbox rental in Victorville, California. Fingerprint inconsistencies raised concerns, but the man left before the issue could be resolved. That file was never pursued. Until now. When facial recognition software ran the enhanced mirror image against booking photos from 2017, the match came back at 94%. Investigators then obtained Jason's original correctional intake photo, comparing it with the man in the motel room behind Zoe. The alignment was undeniable. Jaw structure, left ear asymmetry, even a small scar across the left cheek matched perfectly. It wasn't Ethan, it wasn't Liam. It was Jason. And he had been in that motel room the night she vanished. There was no doubt now that Zoe had recognized him. That look in her eyes, red-rimmed, exhausted but composed, took on a devastating new weight. She hadn't stumbled into danger accidentally. She'd been cornered by someone she once called family. And she'd known. She'd looked directly into the lens as he stood behind her and hit the shutter. A moment captured not for beauty or branding, but as documentation, maybe even evidence. Detectives dug deeper. Rental car records, traffic cams, and toll booth pings placed a silver 2007 Honda Accord registered under a fake name heading north from Victorville to Barstow on the afternoon of July 13, 2022. The plates had been removed shortly after. The vehicle was later found abandoned near an RV park 2 towns over. The VIN had been scratched out. But under blacklight, the numbers revealed Jason's fingerprints on the steering wheel, gear shift, and rearview mirror. The same prints matched ones found, quietly and long ago, on a broken picture frame in Anna Caldwell's old childhood bedroom. But the most chilling discovery came from Zoe's old email account, archived drafts. One message stood out. It was never sent. Dated July 9th, 4 days before her disappearance. Subject line, "If I don't make it out." The body read, "His name is Jason. He found me. I thought I was safe. If I disappear, tell Rachel to check the Dropbox. There's a file. Use it." The file wasn't there anymore. The Dropbox had been emptied days after her disappearance. But the email remained, sitting quietly, unsent, as if she had run out of time. Detectives now understood the entire landscape differently. Jason hadn't stumbled into Zoe's life through coincidence. He had studied it, waited, tracked her not through social media, but through people, contacts, conversations, and perhaps even intermediaries like Ethan. The puzzle fit. Zoe had spent years meticulously hiding from a public that thought she was simply private. But in reality, she had been covering her tracks from a brother who didn't respect her right to disappear. The final question haunted the task force now overseeing the case. If Jason had been there that night, standing silently in the doorway, watching as Zoe took her final photo, where had he gone next? And more terrifying, what had he done with her? The storage facility was barely noticeable, wedged between a used tire lot and a shuttered liquor store just outside. Fontana. Nothing about it stood out. No security gate, no surveillance. The kind of place that didn't ask questions and never filed complaints. The unit in question had been registered under the name Jeremy Callan, the same alias Jason Caldwell had used months earlier to try and renew a fraudulent driver's license. It was paid in cash every 60 days. The key was discovered during a vehicle search after his abandoned Honda Accord was found near Lake Mead. The storage number was scratched onto the inside flap of a gas receipt tucked in the glove compartment. No labels, no name, just a number and a date, July 12th, 1 day before Zoe disappeared. When investigators opened the unit, they expected clothing, maybe tools or basic travel supplies. What they found instead froze everyone in place. Against the back wall, in a battered red duffel bag, sat Zoe's old HP laptop, its sticker-covered surface chipped and dusty, but unmistakably hers. Alongside it were 2 external hard drives labeled in faded marker, 2015 and P1. The serial number on the laptop matched one Zoe had registered years earlier during her community college enrollment in Boise. The files inside it, recovered after hours of password cracking, read like fragments of a life Zoe had tried desperately to erase. Personal journals, scanned drawings, college essays, and embedded between innocuous folders was something else, a subfolder titled Not Safe. Inside, investigators found 5 video files, each one encrypted. Forensics teams worked through 2 full days of decryption, bouncing keys off Zoe's old email recoveries and backup question archives. The 4th video cracked first, its timestamp, June 19, 2022. The video opened with shaky resolution. Zoe sat against a blank white wall, her hair tied up, no makeup. Her voice was level, but the tension sat just beneath her words. She looked into the lens and said, "If I'm wrong, I'll delete this later. If I'm right, then at least someone will know." She explained that she had received a message through a mutual acquaintance, a former classmate from Twin Falls, saying her brother, Jason, had been seen in Los Angeles. The friend thought nothing of it, but Zoe's voice stiffened. "I changed my number 3 times, she said. "There's no reason he should be anywhere near here." She paused, then added, "I haven't seen him since I was 17. And if he's here, he's not here to apologize." Her tone never cracked, but her hands did. Throughout the video, she fidgeted, pulling at a loose thread on her sleeve, pressing her knuckles together. She explained how she'd started feeling watched again, not followed, just seen. At stores, outside her apartment, in places she didn't post about publicly. She hadn't gone to the police. "Because I already tried that once," she said, referencing her sealed 2016 complaint. "And they told me it was probably nothing, that I was dramatic." The final entry was the last to be decrypted. Time-stamped July 12, 2022, less than 24 hours before her podcast interview. Zoe sat on the edge of her bed, visibly more exhausted. Her eyes looked sunken. Her speech was slower. "Tomorrow I'm going on record," she said. "Not just about work, about everything. I'm not naming him, not unless I have to. But I'm going to talk about control, about fear, about what it means to disappear without leaving. And if I don't show up tomorrow, it's because he did." That line ended the recording. No final words, no explanation, just the camera stopping as she blinked, then darkness. The fact that Jason had that video, had physically held the drive, meant more than anyone wanted to admit. It meant he had been in possession of her fears, of her truths. He had retrieved something she thought was gone forever. That laptop had once been reported as discarded. Zoe had told a friend back in 2019 that she'd tossed it during a move. But Jason had it, along with drives containing intimate thoughts, drafts of old blog posts, and encrypted fragments of a girl trying to rebuild her identity. Files she never shared publicly. Files only someone watching her that closely could have retrieved. The drives contained no direct evidence of her final hours, no GPS data, no photos from the day she vanished. But the emotional weight inside them, the paranoia, the grief, the years of suppressed panic, formed a map. And that map pointed to a single conclusion. She had known this ending was possible. Not because she was paranoid, but because history had taught her that no matter how carefully she hid, Jason always found a way to reach back in. Investigators now saw her final moves, checking into a motel, using a burner phone, wiping her primary device. Not as random acts of confusion, but calculated responses. She had realized he was closing in. She had taken precautions. But the one thing she hadn't done was run again. Not fully. She had agreed to the podcast. She had planned to speak. Maybe not directly about Jason, but enough to crack open the silence she'd maintained since her teens, and Jason had likely known that. The image in the mirror, the burner calls, the chilling stillness of the motel room. They weren't isolated events. They were the end of a pattern that had started years earlier in a Twin Falls bedroom with a locked door and a silent scream. Now, inside a storage unit under a fake name, police had found the story Zoe never got to finish. The only piece left was whether Jason ever meant for it to be found at all. The final break came from something small. A retired park ranger in Nevada recognized the face. He'd seen it in a missing persons bulletin a week earlier, then again in a viral Reddit post. The blurry profile in the motel mirror, digitally enhanced and circled in red. The man hadn't given his name when he pulled into the RV lot outside Boulder City, paid in cash, stayed quiet. The ranger said he kept to himself and didn't leave during the day. The RV's curtains never moved. But something about his eyes, the way he scanned the lot as if it might turn on him, stuck. After reporting the tip, local deputies arrived just after 6 a.m. on December 4th, 2023. They found Jason Caldwell inside, alone, seated at a fold-out table. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. The ID in his pocket read, Jeremy Callan. It was fake. His fingerprint told the truth. What they found next confirmed what so many had feared. In a dry ravine off the edge of Lake Mead, 4 miles from where Jason had parked the RV, they found disturbed soil, recent, shallow, no vegetation. Cadaver dogs led them straight to it. Forensic teams worked for hours under floodlights, carefully excavating. Beneath the surface were human remains, wrapped in a weathered sheet and tied with nylon rope. DNA tests would take 3 days. But when the news broke, no one waited for the official word. Everyone already knew. The remains belonged to Zoe Hart. The reaction online was instant, chaotic, and devastating. For over a year, her name had filled forums, podcasts, and documentaries. But until now, there was always hope. threadbare but present, that maybe she had survived, escaped, or hidden herself again. Maybe she'd left one last time and just didn't want to be found. But now there was no maybe left. The story had ended in the same silence it had always circled, and it ended at the hands of the one person she'd been trying to outrun since she was 17. Jason Caldwell didn't confess. Not then. Not after. Not in custody. But investigators didn't need him to. Inside his RV were the answers. Messy, fragmented, but enough. They found the same hard drives from the Fontana storage unit, now partially wiped. Notes written on legal pads, dates, addresses, passwords. One page titled, "Backup Plan if she talks." Beneath it were instructions: how to intercept her podcast appearance, how to reset her phone, how to erase the trail. They also found contact logs, encrypted emails between Jason and Ethan Kessler, dated months before Zoe vanished. Posing as Sam, a business rep for Zoe's brand, Jason had manipulated Ethan into thinking he was working directly with her. He offered money, claimed Zoe wanted Ethan's help organizing appearances, and suggested late-night confessions would be a good low-pressure start to test her return to public speaking. Ethan, drawn back into the orbit of control he once thrived in, took the bait. Liam Drew's involvement, investigators now believe, was passive but complicit. He had no idea who Jason really was, only that a manager had arranged the interview. He received a payment from a dummy, account days before recording. After Zoe vanished, that same account wired him an additional $4,000 with the note, "Silence is better." Liam never touched the money, but he never gave it back. When questioned again, he admitted the guest hadn't booked through Zoe's official email, that the manager had insisted on specific conditions, that he had noticed Zoe seemed nervous but didn't ask why, that when the camera cut out mid-sentence, he panicked, not because she disappeared, but because he realized someone else had been watching. From the stairwell, from the hallway without cameras, from just out of frame, that man, Jason, had spent over a year orchestrating the return, not just Zoe's return to the public, but his return into her life. He had built the illusion of opportunity, then waited for the moment she would let her guard down just enough. When she stepped into that podcast studio, he was already nearby. The knocking sound caught on tape wasn't accidental. It was his signal. The interruption wasn't technical. It was deliberate. From that point forward, everything moved under his control. The final clue, the one Jason hadn't planned for, was the photo Zoe had taken of herself, the mirror image, the blurred shape in the corner. It had survived because of a forgotten backup setting, an automated upload that placed the file in a cloud folder even she didn't remember creating. It was recovered by a stranger, passed through forms, verified by forensic analysts, and ultimately used to identify the person behind her disappearance. That one photo, unpolished and raw, told more truth than anything Zoe had ever been allowed to say out loud. And in the end, it gave investigators the break they needed to bring her home. At her memorial in January, her closest friend read aloud from one of the video diaries found on her hard drive. Zoe had said, "They don't believe you when you're quiet. They don't believe you when you're loud. But someone will believe the silence. Eventually." That line stayed with everyone, because in the end, that's what she left behind. Not a confession, not a scream, but a silence so full of truth, it cracked the entire story open. She had tried to escape him by becoming someone new, but he hadn't chased Zoe Hart. He had always been hunting Anna Caldwell.